Hey guys, today we're building this corner for an upcoming diorama. I always start by making patterns and sketching out ideas for my builds, especially when they're going to be detailed like this one. Today, we are going to be focused on making the room box for this build because I'm going to have to break this thing into a lot of parts since it's so detailed. First, I'm going to start out with some cardboard. This is not corrugated cardboard, which is the stuff you usually get with your Amazon purchases, but this is a flattened kind of cardboard, more like cereal box cardboard. I'm gonna glue down my pattern piece and then I'm gonna start cutting it out. These are gonna be the two walls of the structure, so I'm cutting these out and I'm also gonna cut out the windows. I'm not gonna worry about removing the paper later on because I'm gonna be covering it up with some faux. Since I made these pattern pieces on the computer with some guides as to what size everything should be, I'm still not 100% sure that they're gonna fit together properly, and I may have made a mistake here or there. So I'm doing a little bit of a test fit to see how they're gonna glue together and make sure everything fits. I have a small rectangle of pink insulation foam here, and this is what I'm gonna use to make the stone texture for the walls. Now I'm gonna grab my hot wire cutter and I'm gonna cut this foam into thin sheets. I'm gonna use the distance between the wire and the tabletop as the thickness for my foam, which is really thin. It's about 2 millimeters thick, and I covered my desktop with a floor tile to help the foam slide easier. Now that I have these thin pieces of foam, I need to print out another sheet of paper with this same outline of the walls on it, and then I'm gonna trace over all of the lines onto the foam so that I have a cutting guide. Then once I cut out the shapes, I'm gonna go over the top of the foam with a pencil and just draw in where I want all of my stones to be. And then I'm gonna use my X-Acto knife to carve the details in a little bit deeper and to scrape up some of the stones to make them a little bit more recessed. Because my husband is an adorable penguin, he brought me this rock, which I'm gonna use to add some more texture to these stones to help with the realism. Now I'm gonna seal the foam with a mixture of matte Mod Podge and some water. It's mostly Mod Podge and just a couple of drops of water in there to help it be a little bit more thin, but I could probably do this with straight Mod Podge too. And I'm gonna go ahead and set this to the side and let it dry. While that's drying, I'm gonna work on the windows. This is some cardstock paper that I had, and I printed out another sheet with these windows and glued it down with some spray adhesive so it could be very flat and I could make sure all of the parts stuck down. Because when you're cutting this out with an X-Acto knife, if there's even a little section that's not really glued down, it's gonna be a little bit harder to not have it wiggle around on you and get all messed up. I'm adding some thin strips of basswood for the details, and now that that's ready, it's time to paint these. I'm gonna paint these with some black acrylic paint, and later I'm gonna be gluing them down to some plastic, but right now I'm gonna set these aside again to let them dry as well. So now I'm gonna go over that with some white paint, and then I'm gonna set it aside and let it dry some more because most of this process is just waiting for things to dry. I'm gonna work on the floor while both of those things are drying, and I've got these popsicle sticks / coffee stirrers that I'm gonna use for the floorboards. I'm gluing them down with some tacky glue, and I'm gonna end up cutting off the edges that are overhanging, but right now I'm gonna leave them while this dries. And I wasn't sure at this point whether I wanted the floorboards to be wooden or whether I wanted a stone floor. So on the other side of the floor, I'm using some foam and I'm gonna create a floor that's stone because I think that might look better. I'm using the exact same steps that I used for the walls. The difference is with the floor, I decided to make them larger square stones and to make them a lot more uniform. Adding some missing stones and some cracks here and there, but I'm trying not to go too overboard with this because there is going to be furniture eventually that's going to have to sit on this floor, so I don't want the floor to be too uneven. After I'm done carving all the cracks, I'm using a metal sculpting tool to smooth down some of the stones. Now I'm going over it with some white paint mixed with Mod Podge to seal it in like I did the walls. And I added in some grains of sand to be some dislodged rocks from the floor. And once again, we're waiting for something to dry. While that's drying, I'm using some UV resin on the back of the windows and sticking it down to some plastic. I used to really like using super glue to glue the windows down to the plastic, but it always left like a white film around the edges that I didn't like. So I've switched over to using UV resin, and I feel like it turns out a lot better with this anyway. I'm using a little bit of white acrylic paint to highlight parts of the window, and now the windows are done. And the floors are now dry. So now I'm painting over the floor with some gray paint, and I'm using different shades of gray so that the stones don't all look exactly the same. I'm gonna do the same thing to the walls. I had to make a choice here whether I wanted the white part of the walls to show through and for it to look like there was mortar that was sticking all of these stones together. I decided to paint everything gray and then do a dark wash on top of everything. A wash is some acrylic paint that you thin down and go over the top of everything with, and then it seeps into the nooks and crannies and gives it a little more depth. I added a little bit of gloss varnish to the wash that I put on the floors so that they would be slightly more shiny than the walls. Now I'm going to glue everything together. I'm gluing the windows in place using some tacky glue to just attach them to the cardboard. Once I get to the foam, I'm actually going to use some foam adhesive to stick this down to the cardboard. And I'm sandwiching it over the top of the windows and the cardboard so that the windows are in between. Now I'm going to carve out the area where I'm going to attach the walls to the floor so that they can adhere a little bit better. And I'm going to use some glue to stick them down. I'm using tacky glue because most of the wall is cardboard, so I don't need to worry about using foam glue for this part. And I'm going to just make sure those are fitting together really well and then sit this to the side to dry. The last little finishing touches that we're going to be working on today in this video is just painting the edges a black color so that they disappear and they're not something that catches your eye when you're looking at this room box corner. And I'm gonna take one of my fluffy brushes, cover it with some light gray paint, and then take all that paint off so that I can dry brush over this rock and bring out some of that texture that we put in at the beginning. And that's gonna complete this build for now. This is gonna be like a 2-parter, maybe a 3-parter. I think I can get everything else done in the next video, but we're gonna be filling this with furniture and lots of bottles and trinkets. So yeah, there's a lot of work still. Thank you guys for watching. If you wanna see the next part of this video, stay tuned, it'll be out next week, and I will see you guys then in the next video.